I'll tell you, first of all, good morning. Good morning to everyone. When you look at Trump's Agenda 47 and some of the people that he's nominating to cabinet positions, unless people of goodwill with good sense stand up en masse and protest, we are headed into very perilous times. Very, very perilous times. Let's talk about it.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Again, good morning, and here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they occur in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historic context in which most events take place. During each episode of this podcast, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that impact the global village in which we live. So on today's program, for the first half of the program, we're going to explore some of today's headlines, and then we're going to talk with my guest, Professor Francis Boyle, about the International Criminal Court issuing an arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and a number of others. So with that, let's start with this. The Washington Post today reports rights group says Israel used U.S. equipment in, quote, apparent war crime, end quote, in Lebanon. Human Rights Watch has said that an Israeli airstrike in Lebanon that killed 3 journalists last month was carried out with a U.S. bomb guidance kit in what was, quote, most likely a deliberate attack on civilians and an apparent war crime. This is the Washington Post. In a report, Human Rights Watch said that based on interviews with survivors and visual evidence of the attack, Israel used, quote, an airdropped bomb equipped with a United States-produced Joint Direct Attack Munition, or what's known as a JDAM. It's a guidance kit in its October 25th strike against a residence where journalists were staying in the southern town of Hasbaya. The JDAM is a piece of equipment that turns unguided bombs into precision-guided munitions. And it's important, again, to clearly understand that this was a residence in a residential neighborhood. This was not a military target. So, to me, we have to really ask ourselves, what's the ultimate objective to this horror? Other than horror, what's the point? Now, this is Human Rights Watch assessing this. This isn't my opinion. This is me just telling you what's been reported in the Washington Post. Using a JDAM kit to strike an apartment building and indiscriminately murder women and children, targets that have absolutely no military value at all? What have we devolved to? Now, these actions are being engaged in during the Biden-Harris administration. And it appears as though they're only going to escalate if President-elect Trump's nominee for Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, is approved and if Hegseth gets his way. So let's connect some dots. The Guardian newspaper reports Trump Pentagon pick attacks UN and NATO and urges U.S. to ignore Geneva Conventions. Ignore Geneva Conventions. In the book American Crusade, which was published in 2020, Hedgepeth asks in the book, quote, why do we fund the anti-American UN? Why is Islamist Turkey or Turkey a member of NATO? He goes on to say, quote, if you love America, you should love Israel, end quote. He argues in this book, American Crusade, that the U.S. military should ignore the Geneva Conventions and any international laws governing the conduct of war, and instead unleash them. This is Hedgepeth now. Unleash them to become a, quote, ruthless, uncompromising, and overwhelming lethal force geared to winning our wars according to our own rules, end quote. First, if you love America, you should love America. Full stop, end of sentence. No other country needs to be referenced or mentioned. Tying American interests and policies to the interests and policies of another country leads to JDAM kits being used to strike apartment buildings and indiscriminately murdering women and children, targets that have absolutely no value at all. When you ignore international laws, international norms, international mores, so that your military can be unleashed upon the world, can become ruthless and uncompromising, when you think your military is overwhelmingly lethal, winning our wars according to our rules, that's dangerous. Now, this rhetoric might sound good to some on the domestic front, but this bloviating, dangerous, jingoistic rhetoric is also being heard by many, many, many people around the world. And what gets lost in the translation here in the United States is the moral leadership that the United States thought it had, may have had, maybe once had. That moral leadership has now evaporated. It's gone. Now, I agree with Hedgepeth. NATO is antiquated. The need for it has long passed. But the calling of the United Nations un-American, when the U.S., for all intents and purposes, controls or at least unduly influences the outcome of United Nations resolutions, you're going to call that body un-American? Ignoring the Geneva Conventions? Remember, what's done by you and or in your name can also be done to you. It can also be done to you. So the American people and the Senate, they better do their jobs here. We are headed into very, very, very perilous times. Another article, I think this is from The Guardian. France says Ukraine can fire French long-range missiles into Russia. Remember now, Putin has said, Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that Russia has the right to strike the military facilities of any country that is supplying Ukraine with long-range missiles to hit Russia. In fact, this is a story actually you'll find this story antiwar.com. Dave DeCamp, not The Guardian. Dave DeCamp wrote this story in antiwar.com. So French Foreign Minister Jean-Noel Barrot said over the weekend that Ukraine could fire French-provided long-range missiles into Russian territory following U.S. and British authorization of such strikes. French has provided the Ukraine with its version of the British Storm Shadow. It's called a Scalp, SCALP missile. It's a French version of the British Storm Shadow. They have a range of about 155 miles. So Barrot told the BBC that there are no red lines when it comes to France's support of Ukraine, and that Ukrainian forces could fire the missiles into Russia in the logistics of self-defense. So let's unpack a little bit of that knapsack, as Gary Flowers would say. Let's unpack a little bit of that knapsack. There are no red lines. All bets are off. The gloves are off. This is what France, of all people, this is what France is, of all countries, this is what France is saying. No red lines. And that they can fire these missiles in the logistics of self-defense. Who started the conflict in the first place? It wasn't Russia. It was the United States. By overthrowing I think it was the Lukashenko government in the Maidan coup in 2014. So, folks, there's some very simple, we don't even have to refer to them as legal concepts. This is just common sense. You can't start the fight and then claim self-defense in the middle of the fight when you start getting your hind parts kicked. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way in the international court. It doesn't work that way in American domestic courts. It doesn't work that way in the court of public opinion. It doesn't make sense. You can use the Scalp missile in the logics of, I may have said logistics, in the logics of self-defense. That is prima facie illogical. Quote, the principle has been set. Our messages to President Zelensky have been well received. Volodymyr Zelensky, don't follow these folks further down this rabbit hole. That's not going to be in your best interest. Pay close attention here. Again, Biden and Harris, they're on their way out. Trump is on his way in. And it seems as though, as Scott Ritter said last week, that they are compressing their timeline. Biden, Harris, they're compressing their timeline. The plans that they had for a few months out into 2025 in anticipation of their Kamala Harris winning the White House, the plans that they had for this conflict that out in 2025, they've just moved all those plans up. They've really just moved the plans up. They're trying to create a circumstance of conflict where when Donald Trump gets sworn in on the 20th of January, he has no choice, no option, but to further engage in the conflict that Biden and Harris have started. And now France wants a part of this? Not a very good idea. Going back to Pete Hegseth, NATO, connecting the dots here, NATO is antiquated. The need for it has long, and NATO, Hegseth is right. NATO is antiquated. The need for it has long since passed. And it's NATO countries that are escalating the conflict. As I understand it, NATO was created to be a defensive organization, not an offensive haven for bullies. And that seems to be what we're looking at now, is that NATO was, again, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was created after World War II to stop the threat of further Soviet aggression. What was it? It was created to keep Russia down and America in, is what many people say about why NATO was created. Well, the Soviet Union is no more. This whole idea of a threat that Russia is going to try to recreate the Soviet Union, recapture what were the former Soviet republics, and bring them all back under this influence, that's a myth. That's a fiction. That's just not true. I always ask folks to show me any evidence, any solid evidence that this is a stated intent. I have yet to see anybody show me any statements, any writings within the last 20 years that would validate that myth. They're fighting ghosts. They're fighting ghosts. NATO was supposed to be a defensive organization. Where was France? A NATO member, a NATO ally. Where was France when the United States, a NATO member, a NATO ally, bombed the Nord Stream pipeline, which is the property of another NATO member, another NATO ally? The country is Germany. Where was NATO then? Where is it now? We are headed into some very, very, very perilous times. And you all know the adage, when someone tells you who they are, believe them. Believe them. Believe them. I got it a little wrong. NATO was created to help the U.S. in and up, Germany down. Oh, okay. Well, thank you. You're right. I tried to pull that one off the top of my head, but the point still remains the same. Daniel says that Hegseth is a big-time Christian Zionist, and that is true. And Christian Zionism is an element to a lot of this that doesn't get a lot of the attention and understanding that that is required, because there are a lot of Christians that are using the Israeli-Gazan conflict in their minds to further Armageddon and the return of the Savior and all that kind of stuff. So there are a number of different agendas that are at play here. There are a number of different agendas that are at stake here. And we heard all during the campaign about Project 2025, and that the American people need to be incredibly concerned and afraid of Project 2025, which I don't doubt. I mean, there's no question about that. But it's also important, excuse me, to understand that Project 2025 isn't really anything new. It's a rehash of a lot of already articulated policies, and a lot of articulated policies. Like, you can go back to the contract with America. There are, this is just another iteration of that. And I don't say this to diminish its importance. I don't say this to say you shouldn't be concerned about it, or to say that you shouldn't pay attention to it, because you should be concerned and you should be paying attention. But my point is, it's not new. In fact, you can even look at some of what Bill Clinton did with Al Gore and reinventing government as we know it. A lot of that work, privatizing entities in the United States government, turning those resources and those responsibilities to the private sector. Bill Clinton brought that game into town. So not only is it nothing new, but also it's not just limited to conservative or no, it is neoconservative. It's not limited to Republican ideology, is my point. That there are a lot of Democrats that are working towards those ends as well. Shelley H says, if Jesus returned, he'd be a Palestinian, and as we all know how that turned out. Absolutely right, Shelley. Folks, I mean, Jesus was a Palestinian Jew with hair of lamb's wool and skin of burnt bronze. So he looked a little more hair of lamb's wool and skin. He looked a lot more like me than Charlton Heston. So anyway, going back to the Project 2025, Agenda 47. Remember Donald Trump on the campaign trail saying that he knows nothing about 2025, that he knows absolutely nothing about Project 2025. Well, he does know about Agenda 47. And that's when you look at a lot of the folks that he's nominating to cabinet positions, and the fact that a number of these people really don't have the backgrounds to enable them to effectively manage the agencies that he's hoping to put them in charge of. They're not subject matter experts. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. being put in charge of HHS. He has no background in public policy. So what's the purpose of putting someone who has no background in public health policy? That's the point. He has no background in public policy, but he also has no background in public health policy. And you're going to put him in charge of an entity that is responsible for public health. That doesn't make a lot of sense, unless there's an ulterior agenda or objective at stake here. He tried to put Matt Gaetz in charge of the Department of Justice. And when you listen to Matt Gaetz's rhetoric, his rhetoric is just as dangerous, is just as potentially damaging as Hedgeseth's language is on the defense side. Hedgeseth is looking to start fights. Hedgeseth is looking to continue this fool's errand of expanding the empire when in fact the empire is contracting. It's like a black hole. It's collapsing in on itself. hence the rise of BRICS, and hence the growth of BRICS. Go BRICS. Look up Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now there are about, I think, 12 other countries that are either complete members of BRICS or they are members in waiting. So the alternative to the empire is growing. My point is this: the alternative to the empire is expanding. It's not contracting. The empire is contracting. The alternative to the empire is growing, and growing at leaps and bounds. Remember Joe Biden telling us that he was going to turn the ruble into rubble? The ruble has now become one of the strongest currencies in international trade. And when you look at the expansion of BRICS, also notice it's not a military organization. It's not a military alignment. It's an economic/trade alliance. Now, it does have joint defense elements in it, but that's not the purpose of the organization. The purpose of the organization is based on trade. It's based on growing economies. It's based on creating an environment where some of the smaller, poorer countries can have a more equal footing by trading with larger countries, for example, by taking the basis of the trade off the dollar and enabling the smaller countries to trade in their own currencies. And when those smaller countries are able to trade in their own currencies, that helps to strengthen their economies. Because if I'm China and I want to trade with, pick a country, if I want to trade with Niger, then I have to put in my bank the Nigerian currency. And I'm not sure what that is now, as they're moving away from France. Don't know if they're still trading on the franc or what they're using. But you get the point. By the larger countries trading with the smaller country, and if part of that trade involves the currency of the smaller country, the larger country has to get some of that currency in their bank, thereby bolstering the strength of the smaller country's currency. What's wrong with that? What is wrong with that? That seems to only make, in my opinion, perfect sense. So with that, let's connect another dot. As I said, we're headed into very, very perilous times, very perilous times. The UN news reports the International Criminal Court, the ICC, has announced its decision to issue arrest warrants citing alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and Hamas commander Mohammed Deif. How significant is this? Does this demonstrate another shift in the international perspective regarding the US-backed genocide? Let's talk with my guest. He's a human rights lawyer and professor of international law at the University of Illinois College of Law. He has served as counsel for Bosnia and Herzegovina. He supported the rights of Palestinian and indigenous peoples. Folks, this gentleman is a true scholar, Professor Francis Boyle. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me on, Wilmer. My best to your listening audience again.
Thank you, Francis. I greatly appreciate it. Let's start with this arrest warrant, I think it's pretty simple, but I hate to assume that everybody has the same understanding of the same terminology. So quickly explain, what does this mean that the ICC has announced its decision to issue arrest warrants for the individuals I mentioned, and were you surprised by last week's announcement?
Well, Wilmer, let me say this, better late than never. In 2009, after Operation Cast Lead, I advised Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to accept the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, which he did. And for 15 years, the ICC did nothing but sit on its hands. If the ICC had started to indict the highest level officials of the Israeli government 15 years ago, maybe all this could have been avoided. I don't know. But as far as I'm concerned, the ICC has all the blood of the Palestinian people on its hands for the last 15 years. That being said, yes, this is a very important precedent to indict Prime Minister Netanyahu and the recently fired Minister of Defense Gallant. What it shows to the entire world is that Israel is being governed by a criminal regime. The indictments are for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Crimes against humanity in terms of severity are just short of genocide. And by the way, crimes against humanity go back to the Nuremberg Charter at judgment and principles for what the Nazis did to the Jews. So that is how serious legally what is happening here. Obviously, this is not to the level of the Nazi Holocaust against the Jews, but it's moving in that direction. Obviously, Wilmer, we're now facing Nakba 2. Nakba 1, 1948, ethnically cleansed a good deal of the Mandate for Palestine, expelling 700, 800,000 Palestinians. And now the Zionists want to finish the job off. They want to steal all of the Palestine mandate for Palestine and get rid of as many Palestinians as they possibly can. Right now, the conservative figure is that they've exterminated maybe 200,000 Palestinians in Gaza. That's the Lancet study. Basically, 10% of the population. It continues today as we're watching it. And they are now applying the same types of techniques to the West Bank. They're going to turn the West Bank into Gaza. And as you see also today, Wilmer, they are applying the same techniques now to Lebanon. It's been a long-standing Zionist policy to steal all the way up to the Litani River. Mm-hmm. And so they want to create, greater Israel all the way up to the Litani and the entire former Mandate for Palestine, as well as Syria's Golan Heights, which they've also stolen and ethnically cleansed.
Help me understand the particulars, because I've been making a generalization that may not have actual legal basis, so please correct me. I've been saying for a very long time that under international law, the oppressor, in this instance Israel, does not have the right to defend itself because it is the oppressor and aggressor, and that the oppressed have the right to defend themselves with any means necessary. Now, when we look at the individuals named in the indictment, you've got Netanyahu, you've got Gallant on the Israeli side, but then you have Hamas commander Mohammed Dief. So if you could please help work through the particulars of how does a Palestinian get named in a suit of this nature when in fact he is part of the resistance?
Right. Well, obviously, Wilmer, you've asked some very complicated questions that I do take a good deal of time lecturing my international law students on. But to start with the first question, yes, the International Court of Justice has ruled first in the Wall case and then recently in its new advisory opinion on Israel's illegal occupation of Palestine that Israel does not have a right of self-defense against the Palestinians under Article 51 or otherwise. Rather, Israel is nothing more or less than the belligerent occupant of Palestinian territories. That includes, the World Court said, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, though I would add all of Jerusalem, if not all of land they claim in excess of the partition resolution of 181, they're a belligerent occupant. And a belligerent occupant does not have a right of self-defense against the people they occupy. Rather, this is the World Court speaking. Now, I've argued this for years, but finally the World Court agreed with me first in 2006 and now the second time this year. So a belligerent occupant has a right to maintain law and order by police force, but that's it. And there is no right of self-defense. So this is a canard, and everyone who comes up publicly and says, well, I support the right of self-defense of Israel, is simply aiding and abetting Israeli genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity against the Palestinians. Now, second, as for Mr. Deif, who, all indications are he's dead, so this indictment is sort of a consolation prize, I guess, to the Israelis. There's no point to it. But you raise a good point, Wilmer, in that under Article 1, Paragraph 4 of Additional Protocol 1 to the 4 Geneva Conventions of 1949, and 173 states are a party to it. Hamas, and I would also say Hezbollah, qualify as a national liberation movement. And its guerrillas, fighters, call them what you want, are national liberation fighters. Let me read you this definition. I stand corrected. The last time I looked now, it's 74 state parties, not Israel and the United States. But what is a war of national liberation? Quote, armed conflicts in which peoples are fighting against colonial domination, alien occupation, and against racist regimes in the exercise of the right of self-determination, unquote. That's international law right there. And what do we have? Well, the Palestinian World Court has twice ruled now that the Palestinians had a right of self-determination. As for Israeli occupation of the Mandate for Palestine, certainly colonial domination. The British put them in power. Alien occupation, right. Well, we have white racist Ashkenazi Jews basically exterminating Muslim, Christian Palestinians of color. And of course, racist regime. Well, I just defined it right there. So yes, you are correct. And the same analysis applies to Hezbollah, who expelled Israel from Lebanon after their illegal invasion of 1982. Hezbollah is not a terrorist organization. It's a national liberation movement under Article 1, Paragraph 4 of Additional Protocol 1 to the 4 Geneva Conventions. I just read to you that definition right there. I teach this to my own law students. So again, it's a canard. It's warmongering propaganda. Everyone who gets up and condemns Hamas or Islamic Jihad or Hezbollah as terrorist organizations. These are national liberation movements. Now, second, also, the United Nations General Assembly has ruled in repeated General Assembly resolutions that national liberation movements have a right to seek and receive support from the international community for their liberation activities. So, Wilmer, you're correct in your conclusions. All I wanted to do was to provide a legal framework
Thank
to
you.
back up what, I guess instinctually you understand what's going on here.
Well, thank you very much for that clarity. Does this announcement signal a significant shift in the global perspective? And do you think that this is going to increase pressure on the U.S. and the settler colonial state named Israel, or are they just going to ignore this and continue along their merry way, their genocidal ways?
Well, Wilmer, as for the global perspective, as you know, almost the entirety of the global South supports the Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
It's that simple, including China. So we're talking about the vast majority of states and peoples in the world and people of color who support the Palestinians because they can see with their own eyes it's this white racist colonial regime committing outright genocide against people of color. That's right. So everyone can see that. So what we are seeing, and the only holdouts here have been white racist European capitals in Europe and Canada and the United States. By the way, I should point out, even Australia recently recognized de jure the state of Palestine up to 147 states. So it does appear this is having an impact in Europe, which has been one of the last geographical strongholds, holdouts in recognizing the state of Palestine. That's today 147 states, as well as Palestine having observer state status at the United Nations, like Switzerland had before it became a full-fledged UN member state. And recently, the UN General Assembly upgraded that status to almost de facto UN membership for Palestine, with all the rights of a UN member state except the right to vote and be elected to a committee. Well, most of Europe is a party to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, and they will be bound to respect these arrest warrants. And if you've been following the European press,
that was my next point. Joseph Borrell has just come out and said that the ICC's announcement should be respected by the EU.
That's correct. And Starmer has said, even in the UK, they've said they're going to respect the decisions of the ICC. Macron has said it. So I think what we are now, Maloney, and a few others, Orban have not. Orban's signified defiance, so nothing new.
Orban has even invited Netanyahu. Orban is in Hungary, I think.
Yeah,
has invited Netanyahu to Hungary, which then made me wonder. I had to look at a map in terms of transit and airspace, because I was wondering if Netanyahu has to transit through the airspace of some of these European countries that have said the arrest warrant will be honored.
Yes, you're correct, Wilmer. The Rome Statute for the International Criminal Court also applies to airspace. So, in my opinion, European states around Hungary would have to deny air access for Netanyahu to fly to Hungary. I'm probably the first one to have said that. Maybe you could put that out on the news media. But all the surrounding states are parties to the Rome Statute. It seems to me they would be obligated to deny air access for Netanyahu to fly to Hungary. But it does appear that these arrest warrants have created a crack in European support for the Palestinians, except for Germany. I did want to say I followed the arguments in Nicaragua versus Germany before the International Court of Justice, a separate court. And there the German legal advisor got up and made a Nazi argument, literally a Nazi argument for their support for Israel, saying this is a question of Staatsräson, in German, raison d'etat in French, but Staatsräson. This is the exact same argument that law professor Carl Schmitt, who was the Nazi crown jurist, used to justify every hideous atrocity Hitler and the Nazis inflicted on everyone, including the Jews. So I condemn in the strongest terms possible the German government and their refusal, defiance of their obligations under the Genocide Convention, the Geneva Conventions, and using a Nazi dark argument right there in front of the International Court of Justice. It was an insult. As for here in the, it also appears this will have an impact on Canada as well. Canada, Trudeau seems to be taking seriously their obligations of the Rome Statute for the International Criminal Court. As the United States, as you know, we have the best government and Congress that Zionists can pay for. So, of course, it's total defiance all up and down in the Biden administration and in Congress for what happened here. I don't know if it's going to have much of an impact here in the United States. I regret to say that. I do know my friends at the Center for Constitutional Rights and the National Lawyers Guild are fighting a courageous battle out there in the Ninth Circuit to hold Biden, Blinken, and Austin accountable for violating the 1948 Genocide Convention and the Genocide Convention Implementation Act. It's a tough battle to do any of this in American court, but my hat's off to them.
And this, a lot of the answer to the question I'm about to ask is you've touched on or alluded to, but when Vice President Harris would come out on a stage and say, the first thing she would always say, Israel has the right to defend itself. And then I would scream at the TV or what? No, that's not true. So, and you've just confirmed that. But can anyone in the Biden-Harris administration be found to be co-conspirators in these war crimes and these crimes against humanity?
Well, first, let me say about Vice President Harris, she knows better. She's a lawyer. She graduated from University of California, Hastings College of Law in San Francisco. I've been out there. They've had me out there to debate against the criminal apartheid regime in South Africa. I was very impressed by the caliber of legal education they dispense out there. So she knows better. That was just intended to appeal to the Jewish vote here in the United States. Yes, in answer to your question, the Rome Statute for the International Criminal Court does have the equivalent of an aiding and abetting culpability. So in theory, it could be possible for the Biden administration to be indicted for aiding and abetting these Israeli crimes here of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Personally, I don't think that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. I, in 2010, filed a complaint against Bush Jr., Cheney, Rumsfeld, Ashcroft, Condoleezza Rice, and the rest of them, and Tenet, for their policy of extraordinary rendition at the International Criminal Court. I was the first lawyer to successfully overcome the jurisdictional hurdles and problems there. that complaint was under investigation by the previous ICC prosecutor, Ms. Bensouda from Gambia. And this new fellow came in, Karim Khan, and he killed it. That was it. I mean, it was just killed outright for political reasons. So, to be honest about it, I do not see the ICC indicting and pursuing warrants against Biden and the rest of them, even though they are guilty of sin. There's no question about that. But maybe we will be able to use this in other fora. The Rome Statute for the International Criminal Court requires its member states to have domestic implementing legislation that can be used. And there is a principle of universal jurisdiction under customary international law that could be used as well.
This is slightly afield, but I think it is relevant, especially if the answer is yes. I remember hearing, and this question centers around getting back to airspace and transit through airspace. I remember reading that former Secretary of State Kissinger, once he was back in private life, that he had to have a full-time staffer whose pretty much or primary responsibility was tracking his travel so that he would not enter into the airspace or, quote, jurisdiction of a country that had subscribed to the ICC and the arrest warrants for him. Are you familiar with any of that?
Yes, Kissinger used the law firm, the top flight law firm of Cravath, Swaine, and Moore to look into where he could travel, where it would be safe to travel. I tried to get Kissinger in Canada. I also tried to get Cheney twice up in Canada, but the government up there under the previous regime aborted those legal proceedings. I did scare Bush Jr. Out of Switzerland. He was going to go there after he had stepped down to make a big speech, get paid a lot of money. And the Swiss NGOs up there at that time got a Swiss member of their parliament to demand that the Swiss prosecutor apprehend and prosecute Bush Jr. should he show up in Switzerland for violating the domestic implementing legislation for the Rome Statute for the International Criminal Court for extraordinary rendition and torture pursuant to my ICC complaint that was then pending at the International Criminal Court. I also tried to get Bush Jr. in Tanzania. I sent a démarche down there to Tanzania pointing out their obligations. And unfortunately, the Tanzanian government, I guess, not surprisingly, said, look, we're just a small little country here in Africa, and you really cannot expect us to apprehend and prosecute the former president of the United States of America. Well, that's correct. I mean, you can't really expect the Tanzanians to pull American chestnuts out of the fire for us. It's really up to us to go after these people. And, in fairness, I tried, and, I can understand why Tanzania didn't want to do it, but I tried. I will continue trying. I mean, and by the way, I should point out, Wilmer, I was, I guess, the second generation of international human rights lawyers after the founders, professors of international law, some of which were my teachers at Harvard Law School. Mm-hmm. So there weren't all that many of us back in those days qualified to do that work. But that was 1975. Well, now we have an entire army of international human rights lawyers all over the world and a network to keep track of these people. So I feel confident, if I don't get them, someone else will. I was the one who got Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic
Mm-hmm.
indicted for every crime, almost every crime in the ICTY statute, including 2 counts of genocide. One for genocide in Bosnia in general, 200,000 dead. Now that's what we're dealing with Palestinians. And the second for the genocide at Srebrenica, again, 10,000 dead. And he was on trial at The Hague. So I got him there. Yeah. And at the close of the prosecution's case, he filed a motion to dismiss. The tribunal denied it, ruling that the prosecution had produced enough evidence to convict him beyond a reasonable doubt on all counts charged, including the 2 counts of genocide, and instructing him to open his defense, whereupon he miraculously died. And that was that. That was the end of the case. So it is possible to apprehend a president. I've done it to set that process into motion. It can be done. It is not easy. I went after Milosevic for the first time in the International Court of Justice in 1993. He died. He was indicted in 2000, and he died in The Hague in 2006. So the wheels of international justice are slow, and they do take time. When we're dealing with people who have committed massive atrocities, it takes time for any legal system to catch up with these people. But it can be done. I've done it myself.
Let me switch continents and conflicts. And you are such a vast resource. I remember reading in my doing research on the Ukraine-Russian conflict that in 1991 or 1992, when the United States was trying to convince the then Soviet Union to allow for the reunification of East and West Germany, that then Secretary of State James Baker said to Mikhail Gorbachev, the head of the Soviet Union, if you allow for this reunification, I promise to you that NATO will not move any further eastward towards the Soviet Union. And it was upon that promise that Gorbachev relented and East and West Germany were reunited. And we know, of course, that ever since then, the United States has reneged on that commitment, and we are where we are. There are those who make the point that James Baker's promise, because it was not in writing, was not relevant. And thank you, Daniel Drazenovich, for your super sticker. That promise was not binding. I think it was the case. Was it Greenland v. Norway, like a 1932 international case that held promises made on behalf of nations by representatives must be honored? And that's a paraphrase, but am I anywhere close to being correct on that one?
Yes. As you know, Baker made this promise. Also,
France,
ministers. Yes.
Yeah, France, Britain.
Yes.
France, Britain, France. Anyway, go ahead. Four countries backed it up.
Yes, several leaders or foreign ministers, NATO states, said the exact same thing. The National Security Archives online has a complete documentation of these promises. And you are correct, under the Eastern Greenland case, the World Court ruled that oral promises made by high-level government officials acting within their scope of authority are binding as a matter of international law. So yes, we already gave a binding promise that Ukraine would not be admitted to NATO. So what's the issue here? That has always been the bottom line that the Russians have taken. Foreign Minister Lavrov said that when Russia sent those 2 treaties over to the NATO states and to the United States, which I read, and Lavrov said, look, the bottom line here, Ukraine cannot enter NATO and there has to be absolute guarantees this will not happen, and Ukraine will remain neutral. So we've already made this promise, and yet the Biden administration absolutely refused to negotiate in good faith on those two treaties. I read the two treaties, and certainly they were eminently negotiable with Russia, especially the bottom line, Ukraine not being part of NATO. We already promised that. So what's the problem here? Well, the problem is that's just a pretext for waging war against Russia between you and me.
And Kevin Baptiste, thank you for your super sticker. Professor Francis Boyle, I know you have other issues you must attend to. You were so gracious to give myself and my audience this time today. As always, thank you so much for your time. Look forward to having you back.
Sure. Wilmer, always happy to talk to you, and my best again to your audience.
Thank you. Have a wonderful holiday. Thank you.
Sure. Hey, you too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Yeah. Bye-bye. Hey, folks, you don't hear that guy on a lot of shows. Why isn't he on CNN? Why doesn't he spend an hour with Rachel Maddow? He could, you all know that's rhetorical. So Gregory, my library looks vast. Well, yes, thank you. And this is just one small element of it in my office. But Gregory, thank you for that compliment. But let me take that point and try and connect another dot. Reading is fundamental. And do you have to read all of this? No. Actually, I haven't read all of this. But this is where I think so many of us are falling so short, is we aren't reading enough, and we're not reading enough of the proper materials. And you all have heard me go on that rant before. I really wanted to get Professor Boyle in here today to explain this issue regarding the arrest warrants. And again, folks, listening to Joy Reid say Kamala Harris ran a flawless campaign. No. Every time she stepped on the stage and said, Israel has the right to defend itself, she was wrong. And not only was she wrong, I will say she was lying, because as Professor Boyle told you, she knows better. And when you intentionally mislead, you are lying. You are lying. Remember when she said American troops are not engaged, I'm paraphrasing, are not engaged in conflict anywhere in the world? Remember when she said that? No. And we knew she was wrong. We knew she was lying. But somehow, if you chose not to vote for her, there's something wrong with you. In spite of the fact she would come before you and lie and tell you things, as what do they say? You can't spit in my face and tell me it's raining. So, folks, let me see here. I think that's it for now. Gregory, your library has grown because of me. Well, I take that as a true compliment. Ramplesense says that I have the biggest diversity of great guests. I'm right. We don't see it on any other channels. Right. Thank you. rampling it. Man, I got to figure out how to say that. But you know who I'm talking to. Because for me, that's what this is really all about, is getting the right people who understand. Contrary to Donald Trump, I try to get the right people who do have a true command of the subject matter to be able to come here into this forum, into this space, and share with you the benefits of their knowledge, so that you then can go forth and multiply. You then can go forth and speak to those around you with a sense of an understanding of reality. That's what this is for me. So folks, let me wish you all the happiest of holidays. Please be safe. We are going to be off for the rest of the week. We need a little downtime, a little family time. And so we're going to be off for the remainder of the week. We'll see you a week from today. Back, same bat time, same bat channel. And so again, I wish you all the happiest of holidays. Even if you don't celebrate Thanksgiving in the traditional way, take some time, reflect, and give thanks. And to those around you, to those that love you, to those you love. And if that's, the way you do it, that's the great way to start. So I got to thank my guest today, Professor Francis Boyle. He gave us some time that he honestly didn't have. I truly thank him for joining me today. Thank you all so much for watching and listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Stay tuned for new episodes. Again, we will be off for the remainder of this week, but we will be back here kicking butt and taking names next week. Please follow and subscribe, leave a review. Please share the show. Follow us on social media. You can find all the links below in the show description. Remember, folks, that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge, because talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See you again next time. Until then, I'm Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a great, safe, wonderful holiday. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.